All right, good evening. My name is Jim Gaffney. I'm the Executive Director of the Theta Top Professional Engineering Fraternity, and it is my pleasure to welcome you to tonight's edition of Theta Tau Thursdays. I apologize if there was a little bit of us staring at our screens here at the beginning. We are using a different software tonight to broadcast out to you. So tonight's program is a panel on how engineers and engineering are handling the pandemic. Our panelists tonight are Lindsey Carr, who is one of our executive council delegates. Lindsey is a controls engineer in Michigan. She is a 2015 graduate of the Kappa Gamma chapter at Virginia Commonwealth University. Our second panelist is Maikol Guerrero, who is our Gulf Regional Director. Maikol is a healthcare construction project manager at Mount Sinai Medical Center here in Florida. Maikol is a 2016 graduate of the Omega Gamma chapter at Florida International University. Our third panelist is Simhan, who is a software engineer in Michigan, currently working as a Salesforce director for for Blue Cross Blue Shield, also a STEM teacher at the Robot Garage, which he will be talking about a little bit later. Srini is a 2019 graduate of the Omicron Beta chapter at the University of Michigan at Dearborn. So welcome to all of you. Thank you for making the time to be here. As I said, my name is Jim Gaffney. I'm the executive director. I'm a 2007 initiate of the Kappa Lambda chapter of the Kappa Sigma fraternity at Shippensburg University of Pennsylvania. So to kick things off, the first question in our discussion is, how is your day-to-day different now than it was before the pandemic about 6 months ago?
I guess I'll take that one first. So for me, when the pandemic first started, I was working at a manufacturing facility. They sent us home to work for about 2 months, and that was way more productive. It was very nice. But it was very much, instead of having to get ready and, make your coffee and go to work, right? It was get up, make your coffee, stay in your pajamas, work in your office, which was great. But actually recently, I was laid off about 3 weeks ago now. So that definitely changed the day-to-day of just job hunting. So.
Right. Thank you, Lizzie. I mean, I'll just kind of piggyback off that. We at the hospital here, we started noticing a shift come about March, that a lot of the employee and the workforce started getting reduced hours. So they started implementing a furlough, across the board. They first started with 1 day, and as things got a little bit worse, they implemented 2 days, and they have us now at 3 days. And because our meetings are so spread out and we deal with so many different end users, they just have us to come in a total of 16 hours throughout the week. So we get to choose our hours, but that's pretty much what they have us limited to. While it might sound like we might be doing less, the expectations are actually a little bit higher, since they just feel like we're at home. They definitely want more from us.
So finishing up this question, so I actually have a unique opportunity to be working 2 jobs during the pandemic right now, which one is with Blue Cross Blue Shield as a Salesforce developer, but the other one is actually with a small business here in Michigan called the Robot Garage. And through the Robot Garage, we host a lot of events. We host classes for a younger age group, and we also host a lot of workshops in the community as well. And so the work-to-work situation for Blue Cross is kind of what Lindsey was saying. It's pretty nice, getting up, being able to just make a cup of coffee, go back and work in your pajamas. But for the Robot Garage, since it was completely workshops that were all hands-on in that respect, moving it over to an online platform has taken about the last couple months, just to be able to prep that work, to prep all the Lego kits or to prep all the training kits. And the staff there has done an incredible job of putting that together. And in regards to that, just for us to be able to teach and work with the kids, it's mind this, the kids' age groups are like younger elementary, lower elementary. So when you're trying to help them put pieces together, it's a lot easier to do it in person when you have these kids that are like, how do we put this Lego together? And they, maybe they put it in the wrong way, or they don't insert the axles correctly. But when you're trying to show them online how to do it, you got to be really, really careful to check all the pixels to that degree, just so that they're holding it up and shaking it in the cameras. And it's been an interesting experience, just the amount of time that it takes. That's you could show them how to do it in person versus showing them how to do it over the camera, especially for that age group.
Sure. And so to follow up on that, how, and this is for any of you, I'm not an engineer. I have a degree in journalism, but my understanding is that there are many disciplines of engineering that are very hands-on. Being on site, spinning up a turbine, or inspecting work. And then there are some aspects of engineering that are not hands-on, not on-site, that can be done remotely. How has the fact that many of us have to be remote, many of us have to be at home, we can't be at our work sites for safety reasons, how has that impacted your ability to do your jobs?
So, sorry, Maikol.
Okay. What I was just gonna say is, we deal with, because I'm in construction, we deal a lot with inspectors, and a lot of the inspectors that we deal with are a bit of in their older stages in life. So we've actually done something that's a little bit unheard of before, by walking them through with our iPads to show them what's actually going on and how things are being constructed. Things that you would normally have to do in person, where they have to be present. There's been a lot more flexibility, especially in the construction industry, on how things are being accepted right now. And it's made it a little bit difficult in that sense, from our side, that we can't be there as much to make sure things are getting done. So we have to rely on communication and transparency with our contractors and our other, project engineers, to make sure that everyone's doing what they have to make sure it's a safe environment.
Yeah, for sure. Kind of going off that, when I was working at my last job, manufacturing is kind of interesting just because, I feel like it's similar to construction in a way, building parts, right? But the way it worked for us was, I think we actually ended up communicating a lot more. Whereas like when we were in the office, it was, I can just walk over there, but you end up not walking over to their desk for whatever reason, whereas instead it's way quicker to just send a message over Teams or whatever chat app your company started moving towards, right? And there's a lot more communication going on, so everyone knew exactly what was going on, whereas before people really didn't. So it actually kind of worked out better for my company. it was nice.
Completely the same over here. So given that it's all software in Salesforce for Blue Cross, it's been, before going into the pandemic, it was already completely online, and being able to just turn around and see the next person in the cubicle was much easier than having to track them down. And if somebody's on a lunch break, then they're on a lunch break. But that level of communication has definitely gone up, and I've seen that firsthand just with both sides of the team. Like, we have started using everything from Teams to Slack to Zoom to a bunch of other different applications, just because at the beginning, during the March timeframe, there was a lot of inconsistencies with the wireless connections just on the server side for all those companies, and because they were trying to catch up as well, and they did an amazing job with that. So looking back on that, we jumped, I think, between 4 or 5 different types of network communication platforms, and there's a lot of notifications from those on when you open up your Gmail and you see like Slack or whatever else. So it's definitely been a fun adventure, just being able to try to explore all these different types of communication platforms.
Sure. Maikol, you mentioned doing walkthroughs and things like that on sites. In engineering, unlike in journalism, where like if the evening news doesn't come on, everybody lives. But if you're a nuclear engineer and something goes wrong, perhaps everybody doesn't live. So compliance and interactions with regulatory agencies are often a big part of what you all do as engineers. Maikol's comment brought this up, but I guess this is a question for any of you. Have you seen a change in the way your industries are being regulated and in the ways that compliance are being enforced during this kind of weird and unprecedented time where we can't be near each other and we sometimes can't go to job sites to actually physically inspect things in person?
They're definitely a little bit more understanding of given the circumstances. However, the requirements and documentation that they ask for has become twice what it used to be. So what they had to just come and physically just check off and sign off on something. Now we have to get, our engineers on site to sign off on this, provide memo letters, keep it noted in the plan, submit, additional documentation that says that this is built to compliance, signed off by the architects. And the documentation part of it has increased. So I don't think that the quality of our work has gone down. It's just a different approach to what used to be a lot simpler.
Absolutely. Piggybacking off of that, with giving that the company that I work for, Blue Cross, is in health insurance, especially with COVID right now, there's been a new form of how to handle all the paperwork and all the documentation, and just going through that and seeing all the changes and getting email notifications from like the higher ups on a day-to-day basis has been kind of interesting. Whereas before it was on a week by week or bi-weekly basis that they would send something. But given the pandemic, there's constantly things that are happening in the news and politics that are affecting how companies are responding to this. And it's definitely been an interesting take to see how all the upper management is handling this, especially given that I'm not upper management. I'm somewhere like I'm pretty new to the industry. So it's definitely been kind of cool just to see like how hands-on the upper management is with not just like the upper portions of the company, but also with the other aspects of the company as well.
Sure. And now, Srini, to piggyback off of, or to kind of ask about something that you mentioned earlier, your work at the Robot Garage, that was primarily hands-on stuff before all this happened, right? Like you weren't doing a lot of stuff online remotely?
Yeah, so a lot of it was hands-on. So there'd be like, we'd have Minecraft workshops and a lot of Mindstorms Lego kits. And the vice president and the owners of the company have been creating all these models and all these different types of ways to introduce kids to engineering at many different levels. So it's not just like, here's a set standard that you get from Lego. It's here's a bunch of different creations that we've created so that the kids can learn about different concepts while they're taking these classes. So we talk about like how gears mesh, or how the gear ratios are important, or if you're looking at like directional, like if you're looking at like take rubber bands, for example, that's a good one. You're looking at potential energy and kinetic energy, and we're talking about these topics with kids that have never probably heard these terms before until like 6th or 7th grade. So being able to take all these things that we typically do in person and transition it to online has definitely been interesting, because kind of what I was saying earlier with like they have to show the pieces, and it definitely takes a different level of patience just to sit there and be like, can you bring it closer? Can you move it back? Can you move to the right? I'm not really sure what I'm seeing here, so can you turn it a little bit? And then they'll turn it the other way, and it's super adorable, but it's also it's an adventure of its own, like I was saying earlier.
Now, have you seen is there greater interest in it now than there was before the pandemic, by virtue of people theoretically, and kids especially, not being in school, having more free time? Because like we hear about like everyone is suddenly learning to bake bread, and there's a flour shortage in Manhattan as a result of it. Like, so are you seeing a lot of kids getting involved in these new educational opportunities as a result of this weirdness that we're all living through?
It seems a little odd, and you'd think like, okay, a lot of these topics and a lot of these programs, like if you look at FIRST Robotics or VEX Robotics, are all hands-on, and they're all different types of like programs that you need to be there in person to compete. So when you look at the competition season, COVID started right in the middle of competition season. So competitions got canceled, world championships got canceled. But to that degree, there were still some states that decided to go with the in-person competitive awards and continue to work around that. So I work with a team in Troy, FIRST Robotics Team 226, the Hammerheads. And something that we've been working on for the last 22 years is and I've only been around for about 10 to 11 years. So we've been working on creating feeder programs to bring it back into the community and to show the community like, hey, there are multiple different levels and multiple different age groups, and it's never too early or too late to get involved. And even though these programs are all for like the K through 12 age group, there's a huge need for volunteers, and there's a huge need for mentors from all different kinds of backgrounds, whether it's technical, in the engineering sense or the non-technical sense, because these competitions and these programs center around not just the building aspects, building a robot and stuff, but it's also about working on your presentation skills, working on finding sponsors. So it's kind of like running a little business. So seeing the spike of community interest from that, there was already like large community interest before that's been growing, but to see how it's impacting that FIRST Robotics and Vex Robotics community and bringing it back to how those teams are responding to the COVID situation. You can even like search it on the news. A lot of teams have been making masks and working with hospitals like Beaumont in Michigan and a bunch of other hospitals across the country and across the world to try to donate and create face masks and shields and ventilators and support each other. So it's been, and granted, like most of these students are all in K through 12. So it's a completely, like you don't expect them to be doing this, but they're doing this and they're taking it by the storm here.
That's great to hear. So changing topics a little bit here. And before I go into our next question, for those of you who are viewing, if you have questions for our panelists, please feel free to drop them into the live chat on YouTube, and I'll bring them over here and we'll get those questions answered for you. But moving on, how have the three of you personally had to change your practice, or what other changes have you had to put in place personally and professionally to be able to do your jobs remotely, or in kind of a hybrid way where you're sometimes at home, sometimes at the office?
So from my job, I supported manufacturing production, right? So machine went down, I'd have to go out on the floor, help troubleshoot, all that jazz. But I was also responsible for drawing up schematics and programming that didn't necessarily need to be implemented immediately, stuff like that. So something I ended up having to do was plan and basically write out everything I had to do task-wise and kind of sort it between what can I do at home and what has to be done in the shop. And that way, all of the time I spent in the facility was accounted for. And so it was basically like, all right, I know this is going to take 2 hours, this is going to take an hour, however long, and figuring out how much time I actually had to spend there. And that way I wasn't there any longer than I absolutely needed to be. But it was also making sure I had everything from the facility for the work I needed to do at home if I couldn't access it from the network or what have you. That was definitely an interesting thing to have to work with, because I mean, normally you plan out your tasks and everything, but this felt a little excessive almost.
Yeah, from our perspective, our director and AVP have been on site every day. So we've had to have a communication and, sharing all our calendars so we know which times we're available. So if there's an emergency that needs to be handled, we know who to contact. And that's been the key factor into getting things done. And then the second thing is organizing the department in a way that we have teams going in. So we split every other cubicle would be the person coming in, let's say team A and team B. So team A would only be on site on Tuesdays. Team B would only be on site on Thursdays. Everything else you try to handle with your director, your leadership, to help facilitate anything that comes up. And just constant communication. That's really been the key to all of this.
Sure. So we had a good question, a good kind of follow-up question to this come in through the live chat in YouTube. Have you been experiencing any issues? The question was, have you been experiencing any latency problems while working at home? And I'm 90% sure that the questioner meant, have you been experiencing any delays or slowdowns in your work because you and all of your coworkers are working at home as opposed to all being in an office together? And the follow-up question I'll tack on is, how have you been addressing those potential slowdowns?
I think one of the first things that you had to do was set up a workstation at home. Working on the kitchen table or the sofa definitely got uncomfortable after a while. So getting that Amazon Prime membership to deliver a desk and a chair was crucial to the success of working from home. The other thing, making sure that you have reception. A lot of places, like in your house, you might not have reception. and you can get calls at all times throughout the workday. So you want to make sure you don't take your phone in certain rooms, or make sure it's always on loud, not on vibrate, because you're definitely getting a lot more calls compared to how they just walk to your desk before. Now they're trying to communicate through text or phone calls or even messaging you on your computer.
Yeah, so how I kind of took that question is from working from home, have there been like delays working in projects or whatever just because of, the virtue of not being in an office? And I found it's a lot easier to pester people. Give me this task. I need this now. But
Definitely. So with with a lot of projects, because a lot of extracurriculars are canceled and a lot of people have kids that are typically have, a lot of these extracurriculars that take up their time after work, people are bored at home to a degree. So there's been a lot of work that usually doesn't have deadlines for another 2 weeks that's been getting done like a week ahead of schedule, because outside of that, it's just Netflix or, doing something with the kids or doing something with your family. So yeah, like it's been pretty nice. Proactivity.
Okay. Another question that came in from that same questioner that is, I think, a better version of a question that I was planning to ask is, and I'm actually just going to read it here off my phone. Does anyone take into account the current state of the world when having to prepare, for instance, a cost estimate or other technical calculations for the work that you're doing? Or, if you're not in a position where you're doing that kind of work, are you seeing that from other engineers in your field?
From a cost estimate standpoint, because I would have to quote out equipment, right? And so from having machine builder experience and from my manufacturing experience, the only thing that we saw really being that was needed to be taken into account was availability, because everyone got hit hard, right? And so it was, does this machine builder have enough resources to give us a machine within a reasonable amount of time? And generally speaking, because everyone kind of shut down in manufacturing for a while, unless you were absolutely essential. So if they supported healthcare, they were great. So they machine builders would have tons of resources and be good to go. But that's really the only thing we kind of saw.
For our industry in construction, time is money. So having delays in the review process, like at the city for permit approvals or revisions, means that we have the contractors on site more. So if we have the contractors on site more, there's extended GC costs and just a lot more things you need to take into account inside your budgets. And the hospital right now is keeping a super tight budget to not have to spend money on things that they don't need to. So they want things to be done faster, but things aren't moving faster. They want it to be cheaper, but things are just more expensive. And those delays in contracts that deal with like liquidated damages now are being confronted with legal, because they're like, well, COVID affected me in this sense. And now we're starting to have those conversations because those provisions originally didn't exist in contracts. So now we definitely make sure to have something about a pandemic in there before we release anybody for work.
Kind of the same thing over here. I'm personally not in any of those positions, but kind of what I was saying earlier with getting a lot of those emails and updates from upper management has been about those kinds of changes that are being made. Just making sure everybody's up to the same par and up to the same degree, and making sure that that level of communication is consistent with the companies, kind of what's keeping everything moving forward without any doubts in terms of the projects that we're working on. Because we could be working on projects that's setting up the forms for, these healthcare plans that we're sending to companies or to individuals that are trying to get healthcare through Blue Cross. So to be able to keep all those things consistent, there's a level of communication that they're essentially talking every day from our understanding.
Sure. So thinking ahead to the year ahead, where we have frankly no idea what's going to happen or how this is going to go. But how do you anticipate the pandemic impacting your work and your field of engineering in the coming year?
Well, one thing that we can see right now is a lot of projects are put on hold. So things that are necessary to make the hospital just a better experience overall, or modernize it because the building is from 1968. A lot of those things got set to the back of the line because it's not ultimately necessary. It's more for the patient experience. So some of the exciting things that we're going to be building and constructing and making sure that everyone has a great experience there to get in and out as quickly as possible, to make a really bad situation better. It's now undetermined. It could be pushed to next year, but we don't know what's going to happen next year. So what we usually tend to run a $40 million yearly budget for construction, now that has dropped to 10, 15 million.
Yeah, something we were kind of seeing in manufacturing, because the company I worked for supported healthcare in that they built clean rooms. So that business kind of exploded when the pandemic hit, and was supporting all the other business units. But what we were seeing is because that exploded and non-essential manufacturing was shut down, at least in Michigan, all of those projects were put on hold, and contracts from customers were just immediately put on hold regardless, unless they could show it was an essential business, right? Essential manufacturing. And so what ended up happening is once things kind of started coming back up, production was slammed. And so it's one of those trying to figure out how to, if you can even keep up with lead times, which realistically you just can't. There's only so much volume you can push through in a manufacturing environment. So.
Sure. So talking some more about the future, and this is another question from the YouTube live chat. Have your employers begun suggesting timelines and or processes for when you are going to be returning to the office? Or put another way, has anybody's employer said, we're not, for those of you that don't, that aren't doing hands-on engineering, has anyone suggested, we're just going to keep you at home, we're not going to bother paying for an office and all of the stuff that comes with that when you can just work from home? What are we hearing about what the future is going to look like?
So actually, before my layoff, my company had a timeline of going back into the office about a month before I got laid off. So we were actually already back in the office full time, but we had to wear a mask everywhere. And so if we were out on the floor, you had to wear a mask. The only way you were able to take it off is if you were on break and everything was spread out enough. And that was just because I think most manufacturing facilities around here, at least, are doing that. Is everyone is back in the office unless you're pretty much HR and don't need to be there.
So at Blue Cross, we haven't had any discussion with coming back to the building yet. And it's been mostly because of the fact that even before the pandemic, about the summer beforehand, we transitioned to something called Blue Space. And so that allowed us to actually start working from home a lot more. So more than often, you saw a lot of people working from home about 2 days a week, and then still coming in 3 days for like the more important meetings. But when looking at it from the ongoing system, when you were looking at it, was more along the lines of, we're not bringing people back until everybody's safe and until it's completely approved. Because as you know, like Michigan has had a lot of interesting turns of events with people not wearing masks and so on and so such. I don't want to go into that right now, but with that state of events right now, it's just safer for everybody to stay at home when there's not much for us to do on the floor there.
Yeah, for us, at least construction, it's very difficult to just go 100% teleworking. So we know for a fact that eventually the department needs to come together. But some of the other ones that have had the ability to work remotely, there might be some shift to either keep them that way, to repurpose the building for a more revenue generating department that doesn't require them to have an office within campus.
Sure. does the experience that we're going through has it given any of you kind of unexpected insights into the engineering profession that you maybe didn't have before we all started living through this weird and kind of touch and go time period?
I didn't think that we would have to be going through a page turner on our plans through Zoom or Skype or WebEx and looking at all the little details with other architects and engineers at the same time. And getting everybody to talk in order has been challenging as well. So there's always a lot of voices coming at once, and we try to reduce it as much as possible, but that is challenging because it takes so much time to do the work that way.
Kind of going off that, I actually had a similar experience with the talking over everything, and all I could think was, we just need Robert's rule to here, guys. But that's a little bit of a tangent. But something I kind of noticed is it made me realize how much, even working with manufacturing, right, where we are very hands-on and supporting maintenance and supporting machines running, right? I was actually kind of amazed how much stuff I could do at home. Especially because a lot of the equipment I worked on specifically was about as old as I am. And so really needed to be upgraded, or, had no prints to speak of or any sort of documentation. So it let me, empty out that whole backlog of work just to make things easier in the future. So that was kind of nice.
So being a little bit newer to the industry, it was definitely kind of weird because I think within my first 2 days, my boss said, your primary modes of communication are always going to be email or in person, and you never really should be using any of these other tools unless it's like a really quick message or like a yes or a no or something else like that. But given that we're all home right now, like that is our primary mode of communication, and we were not able to do the first two, so it's always been like, hey, are you free right now? Can we Skype, or can we ask a question? And that's become like maybe 17 times a day. To the normal, where people are just asking each other across our team, like, hey, okay, we need to work on this part. Do you want to get on a call? Let's dash this out and then continue on with our day. And even on the small business side, like there's a lot of little things that are, whether it's like updates to the kits that we're sending the kids or updates to the PDF files to fix our class syllabus or teaching syllabus and such like that. So for us to be able to make those changes, we've been having our calls as a full group just so that we can go through all of these things, and then after we've made all those corrections and stuff, coming back and reflecting and saying, okay, is there anything else that needs to be made? Is there anything else that needs to be changed before moving forward and actually teaching those courses? A lot of pre-planning.
Yeah. So, continuing on the trend of talking about the future, from my perspective as a fraternity executive and a nonprofit executive, we're looking at the next 1 and 2 years and thinking this could be a paradigm shift. The nature of higher education could change here. The role that fraternities play in the campus communities could very well change. Have you seen any indications that the engineering industry is going to be changed by this? And no is an acceptable answer. I'm breaking one of the cardinal rules of journalism and asking a question I don't know the answer to. But I'm genuinely curious. Is this going to change the industry, the industries that the three of you are working in, or is this kind of a speed bump from which things will go back to normal?
I believe the acceptance of digital documents is going to be a massive change to what normally wasn't accepted as often. You'd have to provide like specific memos that say, I notarize that this document digitally signed is accepted. So I think in that sense, for like plan documentations and acceptance, it's going to be the new thing. And unless you need to meet in person, well, let's just set up a WebEx or a Skype call.
Yeah, I think manufacturing, I think there's potential for change, and it's really going to depend on the company, because bigger manufacturers will probably make this shift, whereas smaller ones probably won't. But sort of like what Maikol was saying earlier about having an iPad, right? And having taken the inspector with you, manufacturing can have something similar, and there are actually tools in place for that, to specifically, call the engineer on call and say, hey, take a look at this. Does this look right? Whatever. So I feel like that is one of those shifts that's going to end up happening, at least at bigger manufacturers. So.
Yeah, from the small business perspective, a lot of small businesses definitely took a huge hit during COVID. So something actually interesting that with a lot of these small businesses using Salesforce as their backend, something interesting that Salesforce has actually done recently is they've created a whole series of documents and profiles and a whole, I believe it's called work.com, is an entire platform just for people to start getting back into the work groove and for them to start reopening their businesses safely. And I think several companies have been doing this. And because of that, a lot of these small businesses are getting more, not the support that you'd expect them to get, but definitely a unique version of a support that's definitely helping a lot of people reopen businesses and even some newer businesses as well.
And Lindsey touched on this a little bit earlier in this program when she discussed the fact that she had been laid off. So, I mean, this will be a fairly obvious question for her, but what, if any, kind of career and professional uncertainty has come out of this pandemic for all of you?
Oh, oops.
Right.
Sorry, I was muted for a minute and I thought I had unmuted myself. But what I was going to say real quick is just that what's interesting is before I was laid off, controls engineers up here in general, I'm in a very high demand area for controls engineers, just because it's a fairly wide yet narrow skill set. That I know that I realize that probably makes no sense. But we're generally in very high demand up here. And so I remember thinking that even with a pandemic, I'm pretty secure in my job. And then the day I got laid off was when I was like, oh, I think I'm getting canned today. And so it's a bit of a shock for sure. And like, there's always those rumors going around, right, of, well, did so-and-so get laid off? I don't see these people anymore. What's going on? And so it definitely can be a bit disheartening. But moving forward, even so, like, companies are still hiring engineers, and even getting laid off, there are still those big companies that have gone strong through the whole pandemic. So while being laid off is definitely disheartening, there's still, prospects and hope during it, which is nice.
Yeah, it was a little difficult to ask for a raise in your yearly evaluation because they're not giving raises. We're lucky that we have what we have. And for anybody that's in construction or project engineering or anything like that, where you're managing projects, that industry is very diverse, in which you can go from one niche to the other. So to give an example, I did 3 years of roadway and bridge construction before I actually shifted over to healthcare. If for some reason this industry were in decline or anything like that, I'd have to go to whatever's up and coming, and I can make the adjustment and take the skills that I do have and apply elsewhere, and that's okay. It's scary, especially if you're young and you're trying to develop your career and all that. But at the end of the day, you're going to be stronger for it, and you're going to be more cautious about the decisions that you make and how it impacts you.
Okay. So what skills skills, I guess is the best way to put it. What skills do today's engineering students need to be learning that they're not necessarily going to get from the engineering programs that they're currently in, engineering programs that were written and built around a pre-pandemic engineering profession? What do they need to learn how to do that they're not going to know how to do coming out of a program that was designed before the pandemic?
So from the software side, software is always evolving, whether it's within a year or whether it's within a decade. Like you look at the mobile phones from back then and you look at the ones you have now, and they're like half the size with a lot of functionalities, like thousands more that you can create, like with apps and such. But with how it's changed for software, I think one of the biggest lessons that I really wish was built in a little bit early on in my collegiate education was actually learning how to use your version control softwares and being able to actually use those kinds of tools. Because when it comes to like using GitHub and stuff, most of the people in your classes typically knew how to use it because they did their own personal projects or like wanted to learn how to code on their own, and they found videos or they taught each other. And that's kind of how software world works. It's like you have threads upon threads, whether you have like Stack Overflow or other blogs, where it's just constantly people are answering each other's questions and answering a lot of other types of questions, whether it's in like Android app development or Java development, Salesforce development, and even controls engineering to a degree. Like if you look at robotics, especially with some of the stuff that we do in robotics, it's very similar to the things that people go into controls engineering to do. Correct me if I'm wrong on that, Lindsey. That's just from what I've heard. So with that in mind, it's definitely been interesting in the aspects of, I wish if I were to go through my college educations again, thank God I don't have to, but if I had to go through it again, I really wish within my first couple of classes, somebody taught me how to use Google Calendar or somebody taught me how to use task management. Thankfully, I learned that from this fraternity. So yeah, rah rah. But yeah, so I really wish people taught me how to do those things earlier in college, because I didn't learn those things until after I joined the chapter and after I started getting involved on campus. And there wasn't as much of a need for that. But when you got to senior design and when you started doing group projects, there was such a high demand on being able to use all these tools, whether it was Zoom or Skype or Microsoft Teams, that it was like, if you don't know how to use it, then you're going to have a struggle trying to do any online presentations. I had a lot of my classes were online as well, which that was a really good shift. And I think given a lot of colleges started shifting towards that, it definitely helped with transitioning the college system over to the pandemic system for colleges. But not implementing that a lot sooner when the technology was already available and evolving with the technology changes then made it a little bit harder. So I know there's a lot of accreditation issues where you have to make sure everything's ABET accredited and specifically tuned out for whichever field you're going into. Because I know data science and AI are typically newer fields that they're starting to introduce to lower classes in the software fields. So if you look at AI, typically a lot of people don't get into machine learning and AI at least 15 years ago until they were in their master's or doing their PhD. But now I already taken 2 classes in my undergrad just going over AI stuff, and I find that incredible that there used to be such a huge gap between like the bachelor level and the PhD level, but because there's so much knowledge and so many things to learn, that gap is closed down to make room for more stuff. And so I think it's really important that colleges keep up with those trends, and being, especially on that note, being able to pay a lot of these professors that are definitely severely underpaid to be teaching these courses. I know a good number of my professors from Dearborn were working not just at Dearborn, but also at 2 or 3 of the community colleges, and then also working a full-time job at like Ford or another company just so that they can finish their PhD and still support their families. So if any colleges are watching this, please pay your teachers. They do a lot for you guys, whether you realize it or not.
Absolutely. And so I guess expanding the scope of the original question a little bit, and Trini, you kind of touched on this at length, I think. What other, maybe not necessarily pandemic related skills, but what other skills do you see today's engineering students needing that they're not necessarily getting from their engineering programs?
Yeah, I would say that you got to lean back to something that doesn't fail, and that's networking. We tend to be introverted by nature, and it's very easy to take advantage of this work from home to just isolate yourself, do your work, clock in your hours. But you can't forget that as you want to move up in your companies, the more people that you get exposed to, the more people hear your name, the more likely of a chance you're going to get to move on to bigger and better things. And if you're just stuck at home clocking in your hours and you don't give yourself that exposure and put yourself in a position to succeed, it's going to be very difficult for you to move up the ladder. So that's something that engineering might not teach you, but if they did, I think that all of us would be CEOs at this point.
I would kind of say to something I wish I had known right before graduating and starting a job is just, how does a job actually work? You know, besides like, yeah, you clock in, you do things, and then you clock out, you're done. But that was pretty much my view of how the adult working world was like, you know. And so after I graduated and I started my job, which when I graduated, I moved 12 hours away from home to start this job and had no idea what to expect at all, right? What kind of environment should you expect when you go into the working world, and how do you treat people professionally, especially because for me, which I can't really speak for everyone else, obviously, but I know for me, I was so used to the fraternity and hanging out with fraternity brothers and having that kind of relationship with people, so that when I went to the working world, I didn't really know how to interact with non-fraternity people. Which kind of sounds a little weird, but it was just the whole networking thing kind of goes with that, I think, being able to just talk to other people.
Absolutely. So I think one of the things for me that I found interesting was the financial aspect of it. So like learning what 401ks were, learning about any of those other kinds of HSAs and everything else like that. And I think the only reason I had any inkling of what was going on was because at Nationals 2018, I believe it was it Stu? Yeah, I think it was Stu Cardi, and I think he's on executive council for Theta Tau, and he gave an incredible presentation on finances, and I believe Brandon Satterwhite was also pitching in on that as well. And both of them were the reason I knew what an HSA was when I started working at Blue Cross, and I was like, I know that term, I'm going to look into that. But I really wish there was at least like an intro to finances and intro to budgeting of some sort in college, because not knowing how to play with stocks and not knowing how to do all that stuff, granted, like people would look at that and be like, oh, if you want to do that stuff, be a business major, but you kind of have to know how to do any of the stuff with money from an adulting perspective. And after college, it's, you got to be an adult, so it's kind of a different take on that.
Sure. All right. So second to last question here, and this is one that came in from YouTube. During, while we've all been more or less at home, people are, like opening Etsy shops and, like taking up woodworking and basket weaving and stuff like that. What new hobby or passion project have you adopted while you've been at home?
I made a garden. Well, so this actually started before I got laid off, where I was sitting out on my patio because the weather has been beautiful, and I was like, I need some sunshine in my life. And so I was sitting on my patio, and I was like, I want a bigger patio, but I live in a condo, so I'm fairly limited in what I can do. But I bought all the materials to put paver bricks in this section of dirt next to my patio. And I started the project, and I currently have 4,000 bricks sitting in my garage that I can't do anything with right now because there's this whole problem with water in my area. Started digging it out. Now I have a pond, so that's fun. But I planted some nice shrubs, and I attracted some butterflies with them. So that was super exciting for me the other day.
Yeah. One of the things that I felt like the community down here in Miami really started to pick up on was bike riding. Lots of bike shops were doing pretty well because of that. Some of them were even sold out, and the only thing they were offering were repairs. So that was a lot of fun to be able to ride out, just through the city, something that I don't have to wear a mask for. So it was nice. And then secondly is exploring the other creative sides of you that you haven't tapped on into a while. So when I was younger, from elementary to high school, I actually did about 8 years of photography. So I started building like an Instagram portfolio where I can just post something every day where it's a picture of something I liked, and I dropped like a fun fact about it. I don't have that many followers yet, but that's okay. It makes me feel better, knowing that I'm sticking to my daily post. So if anybody's out there that has any artistic skills, put it to use, and you never know what kind of connections will come out of that.
If you can you send me your tag name later? I'll definitely follow.
I'll be happy to.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Yeah. So hobbies. I see Lindsey laughing over there. So I tend to dabble in a lot of other things. But I think a couple of the things I like picking up random hobbies and random projects on the fly. So I think a couple of the things that I've been working on, especially given everything that's been going on, is actually working a little bit more closer with the robotics community and the robotics network here. So purchased a 3D printer, started making some masks. And then in addition to that, we actually, in the past 3 to 4, it should be about 4 years now. Yeah, about 4 years now. We set up a feeder program called Troy Youth Robotics just for the city of Troy, Michigan, to start incubating teams for FIRST and for the robotics programs and STEM programs that are here, and to start growing more of an interest and more of a financial standing within our community for STEM programs. So over the last first 3 years, we accumulated over 52 teams, each with about 6 to 12 kids. And to be able to manage that and to be able to have the high school team, which has about over 150 kids, and working to manage that and working to redelegate those students and give them the support and resources and training that they need to go and help each of these individual teams that are primarily in the K through 8 area has been kind of interesting. So we have been working with the robotics students on the team, have been putting together a lot of syllabus and programs so that we can start training the kids in the middle schools and in the elementary schools how to code in Java and how to code and make apps and how to like put a robot together, a small robot together. So it's been really weird because the first wave of middle schoolers that was in this program is finally in high school as of last year. And so one of them, I was talking to him one day, and he was like, hey, and this is a freshman. So he was like, hey, I want to make an app to help promote small businesses, Black-owned businesses in our community. How do I work on helping with that? And we started jotting down some ideas, and I thought he was just gonna like sit on it, and because like at that age group, they're just kind of like, let's spew out ideas and then sit on it, and then we'll figure it out when we have money, when we have jobs, when we're like 15 years from now. Yeah, it freaks me out that they're still like 12 years old. But anyways, this kid went home, and by 4 a.m. I got a text on Slack waking me up being like, I finished the app. Do you mind looking through it? I also made a website too. I was speechless. So like seeing these kids like coding better than some of the people that I went to college with, and making these apps like left and right and working on things like that to help support each other and work on each other, it's like been, yeah, that's been my free time.
Great. All right. So our next and final question for the night, because we are coming in on an hour here, is, it seems like every time we turn on the news, there's something new and terrible and worse than what was going on yesterday going on. Like, all of Australia was on fire at the beginning of this year, and that seems like it was a decade ago, and it's only July. So, in this kind of world of constant strife and unhappiness, what gives you hope? What gives you hope in general, but also what gives you hope for the future of the engineering profession?
So generally, yeah, in a general sense, just the fact we're all seeing this, we're all kind of going through this together in a way, and it's knowing, not that I'm, excited other people might feel miserable from this experience, but it's that whole shared, strife, I guess, makes it at least bearable, but what kind of gives me hope is that life will always go on, at least in our lifetime, and so it's no matter what, things will pick back up. It's just a matter of time, right? And as far as engineering goes, engineering will always be needed. It's just a matter of how it's needed, because engineering is such a wide and diverse profession, and it's meant to evolve as time goes on. So that's part of the reason I enjoy engineering so much. It's never going to be the same thing. But I think that's kind of what gives me hope with engineering in particular.
Yeah, I think you said it beautifully there, Lindsey. So good job with that. In terms of anybody going into like civil engineering, anybody out there with that, construction is always going to happen. Well, while industry goes down, the other one goes up. So for right now, something that I've noticed, a lot of transportation development and projects have been ramping up because lots of people aren't driving as much as they have to. So our roads are being built faster and safer. Facilities for hospitals are being constructed because our doctors and our nursing staff, they need a place where it's safe and secure for them to be able to perform their duties and help control the situation and make it better. Research facilities, clean labs that we have. It's one of the projects that I just finished for our pharmacies on site to help with what they're compounding and what they're developing to help out however we can. And just always be there for the people around us in our communities, all the small businesses that you can support. Try to help out as best as you can, and you'll see, as you spread love comes back your way, and stay positive.
I love that. So for us, it's kind of weird. So I think the thing that gives me the most hope is before the pandemic, a lot of depending on the school district, a lot of school district would start actually focusing on STEM careers and STEM majors and getting people opportunities so that they can get into STEM and hopefully bring that money back to this city when they get a job and education and move back home and bring that back in. Michigan's been kind of weird because everybody leaves Michigan at some point. There's studies, I don't want to get into that right now, but there's a lot of studies about that. Apparently it's too cold or something. Well, just a little bit. But the thing that I think that has been from a non-STEM perspective that's been actually refreshing is that the number of people that have been starting smaller businesses that are more dedicated to the arts and more dedicated to the people of the communities and bringing that back into perspective, so that people actually understand that having a career in STEM is great. It's 100% awesome. Like, I'm a STEM major, like I did that, like that's my life. But that shouldn't mean that we should ignore the humanities and ignore the arts and ignore the other aspects of what makes our community. Otherwise, we'd all be pretty left-brained. I'm saying that right? Left-brained? Yeah, we'd all be pretty left-brained if we were all just only STEM majors. So it's good to use the other half of your brain.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. Well, Lindsey, Maikol, Srini, thank you very much for the insight that you've offered and the perspective that you have brought to this discussion. With that, we will say good night. Stay tuned to the fraternity's social media and to your fraternity-associated email for announcements about future Theta Tau Thursdays programs. Thank you for watching, and I hope that you have a good rest of your night, rest of your week, and a great weekend.
Thanks, Jim.
Thanks, Jim. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.